What if I say you?
What? I've always been scared that I'll say it wrong.
I do the morning announcements every morning at home.
I just feel like everyone fights me at once. You can tell that you're not good at everything. Yeah, when are the elections? I'm sorry? When are the elections?
Literally 3 days ago.
No, I can't remember actually.
Do they have speech or anything anymore? Or do they have I don't think they'll be thinking much about it.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't think it's gonna be like a nail biter. No, there isn't.
There are a couple people that I really want to have
Let's see how bad we will go.
But don't be so sure. That's a bad idea. The Connor girls team. I was at the my daughter plays. So this is the one with the station piece. It used to be some girls side. I know this is but the Tom Grange, I think, is the best coach in the district. Better sport. So he's the best. He is a true person, and you just watching him as a coach. He's excited to work with him. So good.
Anyway, they still walk. You know, so I can't. Well, one of the. So that talks. I think when you turn this on, nobody can talk but you. Right. So you want that to be. Now, can you turn it on? There we go. Okay.
Okay, so that's, so I leave it this way.
You leave it that way,
Unless
and then.
someone, welcome to the Board of Ed meeting for, it's okay, for May 2nd, 2017. We have some exciting things planned for today, so let's get started. And first, would you mind calling the roll, please?
Mrs. Blanks?
Here.
Ms. Exum?
Here.
Dr. Greenberg?
Here.
Mr. Paul
Here.
Mr. Sarzan?
Here.
Student Representatives Hugo Barrione?
Here.
And Sarah Berman.
Here. And can I just say that neither Mark could be here today. They both have good excuses. One Mark has left the country, and the other had a death in the family. So we miss them both, but acknowledge they're legitimate. Okay, Sarah, I think it's your turn to lead us, please, in the pledge.
Allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. We don't have any revision to the agenda order that I know, and so I would like to move right to the highlight of the meeting, which is student participation of the ESOL Adventure Club.
This is a very interesting program. I think Shalise, you're going to start off. Shalise Ross will describe a really cool, unique to West Hartford program.
Hi, I'm Shalise Ross. I am the ESOL curriculum specialist for the ESOL English for Speakers of Other Languages programs in West Hartford. And with me we have Mrs. Megan Hayflick, who is the Wolcott School ESOL teacher. So the goal of the ESOL department is so much more than just increasing language proficiency. Our teachers connect with families, help students build friendships, and often adjust to a new school and a new life. Mrs. Hayflick has always worked with students' hearts as well as their minds. I was not surprised when she came to me and wanted to do something special for the ESOL students at Wolcott School.
Okay, good evening. I'm Megan Hayflick. I wanted to provide students with an opportunity to engage with our town, to get out after school and learn through adventures. Many students are new to our town and they do not know all of the enrichment opportunities available to their families. I wanted them to come along with me, see some of our local gems, and then be an ambassador for their family when they return to those locations.
So we created a 6-week program and called it ESOL Adventure Club. We met weekly and visited Faxon Library, the Children's Museum, and Westmore Park. Student teams took pictures, made observations at each location. We discussed what we saw and what we learned. On the days we weren't out on an adventure, teams worked together to talk about their pictures and create a narrated slideshow using the Shadow Puppet app on the iPad. On the last day, we invited parents to a celebration to see our creations and learn about our adventures. You're about to see our Shadow Puppet creation using pictures from the parent celebration. After the video, a few of our club members sitting here will share their reflections on their experience.
So I hope you don't mind. I'm going to talk while the video runs. The results were incredible. Students felt a sense of pride and connection with each other and with our town. I saw an increase in verbal expressive language, most assuredly due to an increase in confidence and a feeling of social connectedness that is often a hidden barrier for our English learners. They still talk about our adventures from last year. We had an adventure this year, and they ask where we're going next. No pressure, right? We also observed so many heartfelt moments of growth in this amazing group of students, and there were 28 of them last year in our club. The amazing things that we saw were things like endless chatter, their facial expressions in awe, their openness and sharing of stories from home, their pride and excitement on adventure club days, and their discovery of places in the community where they live. And lastly, the unexpected bond that was strengthened between the families and our school. And you'll notice there, right before the video ended, the funding came mostly from the Cantor Family Grant that we applied to through the West Hartford Foundation. And so we were able to invite Mayor Cantor, and she made a wonderful appearance, and the kids were absolutely thrilled. And they presented her with an ESOL Club T-shirt. So you ask her, you know, when is she going to put that on? I hope you all recognize this. Okay. And now our students would like to share some of their reflections.
My name is Kunan Naqvi, and I am a first grader. I looked right on the bus to the Faxon Library. I learned that they have many books and movies that you can borrow. All my classmates wanted to be in the club too.
My name is Namrata Mal. I am in first grade. The ESOL Adventure Club was awesome. I enjoyed going to Westmore Park Farm to see the cows, the chickens, and the farmer. All of my classmates wanted to be in the club too.
My name is Kevin Quash and I am a second grader. I liked when we went to Westmore Park because we saw the chickens and other animals. We took a nature walk and found a comb that was broken down. I wondered if it got struck by lightning. The ESOL Club gets me thinking about information text that is real.
My name is Aditya Patel and I am in third grade. My ESOL Adventure Club is fun. Last year I liked when we went to the Children's Museum. I enjoyed taking the picture under the whale. This year I liked when I made a puppet.
Hello, my name is Viha Bhatt. I'm a fifth grader. I like the Children's Museum because we could see all the animals. We got to touch the snake, which was cool but creepy all at the same time. The lizard room was scary too. I enjoyed spending time with Miss Hayflick and the other kids. We really had fun together.
So this year we did an adventure in school, and UConn puppetry students came to teach about puppets, and the students were able to make their own puppets that day. At the Wolcott School Fair in June, students will be using puppets to tell their personal stories, including information about their native culture. So we'd like to thank the board, their parents, everybody in the community for supporting our ESOL programs. These kids have done amazing things, and Ms. Hayflick, like I said, leads with her heart at Wolcott School. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much. We are so proud of you and so happy that you're part of our community. Are there any public communications? Nobody signed up, but I just want to make sure. Is there anybody who wants to speak? Okay, then moving along to our second exciting event of the night, evening, yes, about the Teacher of the Year. Mr. Moore.
Yes, so tonight begins the Teacher of the Year process formally, although these three have been involved in it throughout much of the year after they were nominated, and then had lessons videotaped while they worked, written reflections, and knowing these three great people, I know that they would be the first to tell you that they are here representing about 850 to 900 other people that our teaching staff just at all times really comes through, but especially this year, they deserve great recognition for what has been a tough time and a stressful time for many of them throughout the past few months as we've gone through a difficult budget season. But I have three tremendous individuals. This is completely random order. Don't read anything into who or what. All three are winners in my mind. And so let me describe a couple of them to you, or all three of them to you, actually. The first finalist is Luis Ramirez. Luis, come on up. Luis, to go through his resume doesn't really do justice to any of these three. I've known Luis as a social worker from his time before he worked for the district. He worked at the Bridge, and I worked with him then. And what I can tell you is his devotion to kids is why we wanted to steal him from there to bring him to Smith. And I've personally been involved in a couple of exceptionally difficult situations where once I got there and I saw Luis involved, I knew, okay, we're going to be all right here. And there is not anybody I know in the district more respected by kids, families, or who does more for outreach and tries to make sure everybody feels connected at Smith School and in the town of West Hartford. So it gives me real tremendous pride to know that he's one of the nominees for Teacher of the Year. So, Luis, your big plaque. Congratulations. Thank you. Next up, Anthony Wasley from Hall. So Anthony's been at King Philip and at Hall, and even been at Conard too. He's run the gamut of our secondary schools. And what you need to know about Anthony is he's the kind of teacher who kids love, Mr. Waz typically, correct? And you won't hear a bad word said about him. And an example of what he does, for class, something like a saltwater tank. Many people would order the saltwater tank. Chip would get the bill and complain how much a saltwater tank costs. Instead, we have people like Anthony who, with his class and with your students, combines to build and go through what we need in creating a saltwater tank for the class. And this is somebody who just, when you see him at Hall, you see him smiling. He looks the same as he looks right now. You see him with kids, and I'm sure Sarah would vouch for him and what people think of Anthony, and we are lucky to have him and so happy that he is representing our teachers tonight. So congratulations, Anthony.
Thank you so much.
And last but not least, but most diminutive, Pamela Matway. I am so proud to have Pam up here as one of our nominees for Teacher of the Year. And though I have no favorites amongst these three, she does have one distinction in the district that she's probably not necessarily that proud of, but I am immensely proud of. When I first became an administrator and I was first social studies department supervisor, Pam Matway is the first person I hired for West Hartford Public Schools. And I'm so glad you proved me right. I was nervous for a while. There is nobody. She has, honestly, from the interview when I met her when she was 22 to now, the same energy, the same excitement, the same passion, the same love of kids, the same love of history. Pam is fantastic. Anyone that's had her, as her children have had her as a teacher, know how great she is. She is at Sedgwick. I should have said that sooner. And representing our middle schools. We have a middle school, elementary, and high school. Look at that, symmetry. And boy, I'm proud to have Pam in the district. So congratulations, Pam Matway.
Congratulations to all of you. You're all winners in our book. Before we continue on with the regular scheduled meeting, I just want to read a statement. As part of their vote on the town budget, the West Hartford Town Council has directed the Board of Education to cut another $300,000 from the school budget. We have already cut $2.5 million from the school budget, which includes the elimination of 16 positions in the schools, as well as cuts to programs strongly supported by the community. Meanwhile, we have just learned that West Hartford has been named one of the top 100 school systems in the nation for teachers. And Conard has been recognized as a gold medal school in the top 1% nationally and ranked number 6 in the state. And we've done all this as frugally as possible. Even before the cuts we just made, we spend less per pupil than 127 of 169 towns in the state. In the next couple of weeks, we will be looking at what further cuts we will have to make in order to meet the town's budget demand, and we promise to inform you as soon as we can. Needless to say, we will work our hardest to identify savings that will not directly impact students and student learning. Now moving, there's no unfinished business that I know of, so moving to new business and the approval of state grant applications. Can I have a motion, please, that the Board of Education, can I have a motion, please, that the Board of Education approve state grant applications proposed by the WHPS Adult Education Program?
So moved.
Second.
Okay, thank you. Rosina, you'll tell us about this before we vote?
Yes, I'm happy to be back here at the table again as a follow-up to the NEDP Pathways and Partnership presentation you heard a couple of weeks ago, and just to advocate for something that won't cost the board any money, but they're important programs for West Hartford adult education. Last time when I was here, I shared with you some information about our community needs among the adults in West Hartford. 6% lacking a high school diploma. It's hard to believe that. 7% that do not yet have English language proficiency and try really hard. And then another 4% unemployed. They lack employment. And then we have 8% that earn less than the poverty rate, and 9% of our West Hartford adult households require public assistance. So these programs that are being proposed this evening are to address those community needs. So tonight I'm making a request of the board to approve a grant proposal requesting state funding for 3 programs that provide West Hartford adults with pathways to jobs and opportunities to transition to college and post-secondary training, and to increase their community participation and engagement. So again, these are programs. In the last month, we've written 4 grants, and 3 require board approval first. The other grant, we're mostly supported by the board funding. Our mandated programs are supported by board funding, and we receive 20% support from the state. So the approval for the 3 grants that we're asking for is at no cost to the board. The first program is the Ready, Set, Go to Work program, and it's a new proposal that seeks to provide workforce readiness, contextualized instruction in the English second language classes, and it strives to help people to earn a secondary high school diploma. Now, when I talked about the National External Diploma Program, one of the things I just wanted to clarify is through adults who successfully complete that program, they earn a West Hartford high school diploma, not a GED. So that's the distinction that I want to make. And so through this program, the Ready, Set, Go to Work, we are leveraging our adults in our community who do not have employment pathways and opportunities to gain employment and to maybe transition to post-secondary training or to college. The second program proposal is English for Families and Future. The title is inspired by Tom Moore's vision for clear paths, bright futures, and no limits. And it's a continuation of an existing family literacy program, and it's got a little bit of a slant or bend to it, or an enhancement, I should call it, that we've had this program in place for about a decade in partnership with the Bridge. And it's essentially a 2-generational program which adults who want to improve their English language proficiency take classes while their children are in the family resource preschool development classes. And it's really an opportunity for parents to become engaged in school, in their child's school, getting their children ready for school and getting themselves ready. Some of you may have seen an article. This program was featured in the Hartford Courant article. It's a piece called Immigrant Mothers Learn English and Work Toward Dreams. And their stories are inspiring. You can find it online if you haven't already read it. And then last month you heard the highlights of our National External Diploma Program. And we're still excited about that. And the enhancement to this program is the partnership. And the reason we brought Dave Stevens to the table with us is just to illustrate one example of our partnerships with the community in helping students to acquire secondary school diplomas. And so again, it's different from the GED, but this pathway will help businesses to employ credentialed adults to have the high quality employees that they need and to help the adults get the jobs and opportunities that they need and deserve and want. So these 3 proposals also include at least 11 signed interagency agreements, which means we had to go out, our team had to go out and talk with all of these agencies and get them on board. Agencies from West Hartford Housing Authority, Department of Labor, Department of Rehabilitative Services, Faxon Library, and the list goes on. And so they're on board at no cost to them, but maybe some in-kind services. to support this work. So I have to thank Tom Moore and the entire executive team for their input in putting this proposal together. It was a lot of work, but we think it's very valuable. We hope that you'll support them too. So I open the floor to you for questions.
Thank you. Questions?
Yeah, thank you, Rosina. How much in total do these grants encompass?
The total is $105,000 if
Okay.
we were to get all three.
Okay. So, just out of curiosity, how confident are we that that money, I mean, is this already been set aside and allocated? Or are we, I mean, it's a challenging funding year for the state. Are we confident that we're going to get it?
So this is not these are all new proposals. The state released an RFP, a request for proposals on March 21st. So we had less than 30 business days to put these proposals together. We decided that we were going to try to target programs that are already in existence that we believe we can continue to sustain, even if we don't get this funding. These are really enhancements to two of the programs. The other program, Ready, Set, Go to Work program, is another program that we can absorb into our existing programs as well. But we can do more if we have a little bit more, so that's why we're going out for it.
No, that makes sense. I mean, the only reason I ask, of course, is that if it's an additive program and we move ahead with this and then the rug gets pulled out from underneath us, how do you tell these people, well, we were just kidding? And we would probably have to go out and find $105,000 extra dollars somewhere. So I just am trying to determine if it's...
No, these won't be, if we don't get the grants, we won't come for $105,000 or more spending. These are to build out the programs. And really, the partners are signing on with us, especially for the Ready,
Set, Go to Work.
Ready, Set, Go to Work program, with the hopes that that would expand the program. But if not, we'd look at alternative means with them.
I think we can absorb them in our existing programs that's covered by board funding and the state support. We just have to be creative and strategic and really enlist more resources in the community.
Okay, thank you, Rosina.
Other questions? Issues? Okay, just to clarify, what we're voting on is saying yes, go for the grants, right? We're just approving your competition. So just to be clear about that. So all in favor of the Board of Education approving state grant applications proposed by the WHPS Adult Education Program, please say aye.
Aye.
No? Forgot to say aye. Me too. Thank you.
If I could share with that, I'm actually glad you brought that up, Jay, because with uncertainty with the state and everything else, we're not going for something that would be an additive hire where we've got the person if we don't get grants, and that's not just those grants, that's any of them. I appreciate you bringing that up.
Okay, thank you. Now we're moving down to a set of motions by Tammy Exum, Mark Zdanowitz, and me. The first that we'll be discussing is a motion to accept new policy 2240. This is a first reading, so this is not an approval. This is just, yes, you're going to think about it. And so may I have a motion, please, that the Board of Education accept as a first reading the following new policy, which is proposed by the Board Policy Subcommittee, 2240, Educational Research in District Schools.
So moved.
Second? Second. Thank you. Do you want to, since you're on?
So this one essentially talks about educational research in the school district and when research is conducted, the way that the approval process for it taking place. And it has to have direct services to the children. It also has to have a professional development component, no cost to the district, and parental authorization. That's essentially the components.
And this has really just been our practice over the years, and we use this just as an opportunity as we were going through any remaining policies just to go ahead and put that into place.
Great. Questions, doubts, hesitations, enthusiastic? Okay. Great. Then All in favor of the board accepting as a first reading the new policy which is proposed by the Board of Policy Subcommittee 2240 Educational Research in District Schools, please say aye.
Aye.
No? Okay, thank you. Stay right where you are, Andy. The next is a motion also by Tammy and Mark Z. and me to approve revised policies 6270 and 6500. This is also a first reading. Can I have a motion, please, that the Board of Education accept as a first reading the following policies which were revised by the Board Policy Subcommittee? 6270, which is parent instruction of children at home, and 6500, adult and continuing education.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Thank you. Tammy, I'm afraid you're up for this one too, because I wasn't present for this conversation.
I'll start, and then Andy can jump in. This one is about parent instruction of children at home. First, we try to encourage students to obtain a public school education, but in the event that the parents feel that they'd rather do otherwise, it's the process to have the, to notify pupil services with a signed letter of intent. There's a letter of intent form. And then we also, essentially, once the student is no longer a part of the school and that's been signed off, the parents assume full responsibility. We have no role as a school district. So,
And the process and the letter of intent form also outlines then the checks that go into place on a yearly basis for that. But we felt that this was an updated version. As you saw, the other form was very heavy on the compliance aspect as it was from 1991. We felt that this reflected a more, just an easier approach.
Questions?
But I do have a question. As I was looking over it a bit, the annual portfolio that is in the other piece on the old policy, is that still a part of that? I couldn't remember.
It is, yes. That's on the letter of intent form.
Thank you.
And so maybe my question is similar, if you don't mind, but first of all, one thing that I noticed changed about the new policy is that there's no longer a date by which the letter of intent has to be filed. Is that true? The parent can just file it anytime they feel like it?
That's correct.
And following up on that, I understand that we aren't responsible, but is there any oversight that we can have for these children? I don't mean to be a nanny state person, but sometimes there are children who are kept home who just, okay. And we can't, I assume.
We enter into the contract with the parents, and then there is a portfolio review process that can be put in place at the end of the year. In essence, the parents verifying that certain levels of instruction were continued.
So because the parent take on, I guess, this responsibility, if certain things aren't met based on the district's guidelines, the parent is the one that's ultimately responsible?
Correct.
But when looking back at the old policy, the number 8 here, where it says when you do the portfolio review, and it says it may cause the child to be considered truant and be grounds for a neglect petition, could that be a way of, I know we're not to be involved, we all are going, but we have to be involved a little bit.
The state of Connecticut is fairly clear in the regulations as far as the rights of parents to opt out of a school system.
Okay, sorry. We ready? Any other questions? Okay. Now I've lost where we are. All in favor of the board accepting as a first reading the policies which were revised by the board policy subcommittee, 6270, parent instruction of children at home, and 6500, adult continuing education, which we didn't actually discuss, but were there any questions about it, or should we?
I can explain that simply an update of the policy from 1998, and any changes were created through Dr. Heskin's office to make sure that it's consistent with her programming.
Thank you. Questions about that one?
The only question I had, which is funny, I'm on the committee. The first one under mandated programs, it has over age 16 in the first line, and the second one has that it's open to residents and non-residents age of 17 or older. I don't recall
That's been a change in the statute, is my understanding from that.
Actually, one says over age 16, and the next one says 17 or older, so there actually isn't any change,
Over,
right?
well, 16 and a half.
Right, but,
It clarifies.
no, that's fine. What I'm saying is it's not actually a policy change, right? Because one says you have to be older than 16, and the other one says you have to be 17 or older. So it is actually the same. Is that correct?
16 a day, but not 17. I don't know, but
Okay. Great. I'm going to read the motion again, just because I messed up last time. Okay, all in favor of the Board of Education accepting as a first reading both of the following policies that were revised by the Board Policy Subcommittee: 6270, Parent Instruction of Children at Home, and 6500, Adult and Continuing Education. Please say aye.
Aye.
No? Okay, the ayes overwhelmingly have it. Yet another motion by Tammy Exum, Mark Zadanowitz, and Cheryl Greenberg to approve the reviewed policies 3511, 4060, and 4170. May I have a motion, please?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Thank you. I forgot to read the names. Sorry. Okay. This is the energy conservation policy, the employee HIV and AIDS policy, which we're recommending. We're recommending deleting both of those. And then 4170 is tutoring, counseling, and private counseling.
Correct.
So
I'm sorry.
let's take them. No, I was going to say, so let's take them just one at a time.
Okay. The first, the energy conservation. Again, these are sort of the last, as we've gone through each of the sections as the subcommittee, these were the ones that we identified as being, it's been skipped over for different reasons over the past 7 years as it's been reviewed. And so the energy conservation 3511, we're recommending for deletion because, again, it was 1987, referencing the national energy crisis of the 80s. We feel that perhaps it's a little outdated. And again, if you remember from policies that we put in place earlier this year, we direct all of our buildings and all of our management to be energy neutral as possible. And so we'd recommend that would simply be obsolete and deleted. Do you want to vote individually, or do we want to?
We won't vote, but
Okay.
I just want to make sure there aren't any questions about that one in particular. Okay, second one?
The policy 4060, again, is from 1986, reviewed in 93. The employee HIV and AIDS policy, we felt that is no longer necessary to have a specific policy for that. As you know, our policy states that for everything that we do, we follow the health guidance from the health department.
Questions or concerns about that one? Okay, and then the third, and if there are differences of opinion about approving all three of them, then I'll
Sure.
separate them out. But 4170?
And then 4170 is simply reviewed. It had last been reviewed in 1987, and we went through and checked this against current guidance and INCABE and such, and went ahead and feel that this is still a policy that we feel guides us.
Questions?
I do have a question, Andy, just probably some clarification on the private counseling piece, because I know that there are teachers in town that provide counseling. So help me understand it. They can counsel or tutor, I guess. Is that the one?
Which one? It's two different.
Yeah, the tutoring one.
Tutoring.
So they can tutor a student as long as they don't teach that student
Correct.
in school?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
I have a question about the counseling piece. It says the private counseling of West Hartford students by certified West Hartford professionals is prohibited. Technically, aren't all professionals who work in West Hartford certified West Hartford professionals? I mean, in other words, what I assume you mean is West Hartford professionals certified by the schools or something like that?
Yes, our staff.
Our staff,
It's
because
referring to our staff. correct.
as it is, couldn't it be read that anyone who is certified in West Hartford
I see your distinction. We only have, our policies only apply to our staff and to what we'd have control over. So I believe that the implication there is that there are counselors.
Okay.
I see what you're saying.
Public schools.
Yeah.
We could add.
We can certainly add, you could add public school.
West Hartford Public Schools professionals.
However I mean.
We could add that, sure.
Or just, or we just have it in the record for later boards to understand what we meant for original intent. So however you want to.
Okay, well, we'll go ahead and we'll add the West Hartford, so it'll read Certified West Hartford Public Schools Professional.
I don't mean to be paranoid.
No, that's,
No,
that's fine.
Okay, any other questions about any of these three? Is there anyone who doesn't support any one of the three, so we should separate them, or should we vote on all three together? We're good? Okay. So just to be clear that in this case, these are not first readings. If we vote on them, they are passed. All those in favor that the Board of Education approving the following policies reviewed by the Board Policy Subcommittee: 3511, energy conservation, which will be deleted; 4060, employee HIV/AIDS, which will also be deleted; and 4170, tutoring, counseling, and private counseling, as slightly amended, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, we are unanimous as ever. Thank you. Okay, so now the third highlight of the evening, our staff communications and reports. The superintendent speaks. Mr. Moore.
Okay, so this is the time of year when, realistically, if there's an event, if you have a free night and you think, what should I do? Look at one of the school's calendars. There are events all the time going on. The other thing is, since they're close to awards nights, they hoard their awards for themselves until they can give them out. So I don't have as many of those to announce. But one thing that did just come in that West Hartford seems to be an annual winner of, and it's no wonder if you've been to any of the performances. But West Hartford Public Schools has been honored with the Best Communities for Music Education designation from the NAMM Foundation for its outstanding commitment to music education. 2017 Best Communities for Music Education. So once again, being recognized just in a great way. And as Cheryl mentioned, we were also named in the top 100 places in the United States to have a teaching career based on the community support, based on environment of the workplace. So that was a great feather in the cap. And yes, U.S. News and World Report once again named Conard as gold medal school and top 1% of American schools. And I've gotten questions from people that, because it does need a bit of explanation, why not Hall? You'll find, the truth is, depending on metrics of any ranking systems, in the same week we've had rankings before that have ranked Hall higher, and then the next week something else comes out that ranks Conard higher. This is unique because this goes back to the 14-15 school year when, as you know, there was an anti-testing feeling in some places that certainly took hold amongst the juniors at Hall more than it did at Conard. And because Conard students walked out and didn't take the state assessment, this was before we switched to the SAT, this was the Smarter Balance, Hall didn't have a high enough percentage of students participate to get an accurate sampling, so therefore Hall was not eligible to be in the U.S. News and World Report, even to get read into it. So it didn't kind of make the bar to go to look at the participation and everything else. So I fully expect Hall to be back high in the rankings next year. It's an anomaly, but Hugo, you and the Conard people can enjoy it this year. So, but truly, both schools, great plays and great time of year. Athletic events, music, awards, just walk by the high schools this time of year, and it is just an alive place. It really is a great time to be around our high school kids. So that's that.
Thank you. It's certainly true that you could be busy every single night. Yes. It's amazing. Thank you. And now we will move on to a report about the West Hartford Public School District Profile and Performance Report for 2015-2016 with Mr. Paul Vycinas.
Thank you and good evening. Excited to give you a brief report tonight on the Profile and Performance Report. Talk to you about a new acronym, PPR for short, and go through and highlight this metric that really is a state-generated report that provides you all sorts of data on the performance of our schools. It replaces the strategic school profile that you might be more familiar with. And you should have all received with your board books a copy of it. There are copies on the table for the public, and I'll talk about how it's accessible online. We'll go through very quickly, give you some background on state accountability in general terms, walk through what is contained on the Profile and Performance Report, certainly go into some detail on our different metrics and provide the opportunity for any questions. However, I'll sort of lead with the notion that the majority of this report, in terms of the metrics that are included, are things that we report out on throughout the year. To be specific, one area that you probably won't even hear me mention, they have several tables that cover expenditures for the district. Now, I know that we've just been through a very lengthy, very comprehensive budgeting process where you've gotten oodles more details on our expenditures than anything that's included in this report. So that's one area I'm going to kind of just mention to the public. It's there if they'd like to reference it, but I think that the data that's available on the board webpage in terms of the minutes and the agendas and all of the books, much more detailed if folks are looking for that information. So I'll kind of just jump in with why does the state do this and why do we care? The state tracks progress for schools and districts to support schools to make improvements by demonstrating where support is needed the most and to recognize successes. What's important for the public to recognize is that the metric of these reports is this, or excuse me, the unit for measurement on these reports is the school. The school is the unit, not the individual student. It's student performance, student indicators that form the metrics, but we're really looking at an aggregated level of schools. Reports on school performance in relation to criteria or standards are established by the state of Connecticut, and thereby they establish the legal and credible operational system for evaluating and publicizing school performance results when assigning rewards, assistance, and sanctions, which is done by our Connecticut State Department of Education. Their goals are outlined here, and I just share that to sort of draw attention to how their goals actually nest fairly closely with the board goals relative to improving achievement, reducing gaps among our student groups, producing college and career-ready graduates, and really providing for a comprehensive educational system that prepares students in a well-rounded fashion. The District Profile and Performance Report has just a wealth of information and covers these general areas. I'll talk a little bit about them just to make sure that there's clarity on definitions. But as I said a moment ago, it replaces the strategic school profiles. The strategic school profiles, or SSPs, are available for years up to and including the 2012-2013 school year. And everything after that falls under the PPR. The PPR itself was first published late in the 2015-16 school year after a one-year gap, and they published 2 years worth of reports at that time. So if folks are so inclined and have an interest, they can go online, look up the 13-14, the 14-15, and most recently the 15-16 profile and performance report. It's always around this time of year, kind of in the early spring, that these reports are generated when all of the data from all the various sources is finally available. The PPR includes, as you see here in broad headings, student data, educator data, to include various forms of demographics and attendance for both groups. It includes a lot of detailed information on pupil services or special education, Twin Dip, which is time with non-disabled peers, the categorical distributions. So what are the 7 federally defined categories for disability under pupil services, and what does the profile of our program look like in West Hartford? Who are we servicing? Numbers of outplacements and other expenditures. And then all of what I hope is beginning to become the familiar performance and accountability metrics that are actually fairly new. And again, something that we've reported on 2 times formally, once when they were in draft form and then when they were adopted back in April of 2016. I'm not going to repeat every single detail on every one of these metrics unless you ask me to, but I would encourage you, or certainly the public as referenced in this report, to go ahead and go online to our board website and link to our April 19th Board of Education presentation. There's full explanation on all of those indicators from Connecticut's Next Generation Accountability System. What my goal is, as I've said, since many of these things are have already been reported on separately, I'm going to try to hit some highlights, and anything that you're curious about that I don't happen to mention, I certainly welcome your questions at the end. So I'll start with student data, and again, this is an area where I think Chip provides us much greater detail than his enrollment projections and all of those reports that he provides. But it's simply interesting to notice that from October 2011 to October of 2015, and it's the October census data for schools that's used for this reporting, West Hartford Public Schools has had a slight 3% dip in enrollment, going from 10,068 students in 2011 to 9,757 students at the beginning of the 15-16 school year. So while we've seen that 3% dip in total enrollments, we've seen roughly a 3% increase in students from a diverse background. Okay, our English learner population, and you got to meet some of our very talented students this evening, has remained fairly constant. It's at the 5-year average, I believe, was 5.4%. Last year, we were at 5%. That is a bit of a dip from the previous year, however, where we dropped 0.7%. But overall, a modest loss by comparison. And meanwhile, we've seen a modest gain in our numbers of students from economically disadvantaged and students with disabilities, about 1%, up 1% in both of those groups. Student absenteeism and discipline trends throughout the years that they've been reported here have remained very stable and are below state averages. In terms of educators, what's nice here is that on the PPR, they report our demographic trends for educators, which, as you know, aligns very nicely with Goal 3, our efforts to recruit and develop a more diverse group of educators. And I'm pleased to share that since the 3 years that they've been reporting that data for us, we've seen a 1.5% increase in diversity among our educators, which translates into 16 additional teachers who are from diverse backgrounds. Our teacher quality indicators and teacher attendance rates have been stable over that same period, and again are better than the state average. Moving on to pupil services data and college and career readiness, 2 totally separate but small space on the slide. Under special education, there are quite a large number of indicators that we've mentioned. A lot of that data gets reported out through student metrics that we disaggregate for these groups. One of the highlights that I wanted to mention is Gretchen Nelson's work to support an inclusionary model that has had a positive impact on time with non-disabled peers. Our current metric for 15-16 was 73.5%. 73.5% of our population of students with disabilities spent greater than 80% of their day with non-disabled peers, and that's up 1% or 1.5% from the year before, and well above state average, kind of demonstrating our commitment to servicing students in the least restrictive environment. During that time, I know you've heard Tom mention many times about how we can become a destination district for families, especially families who have students with some different needs. We can report on that from among the 7 federally defined categories for disability. We've seen an uptick in the number of students living with autism. We've seen an uptick in the number of students diagnosed as having an emotional disability and those with other health impairments. Meanwhile, our populations of students with intellectual disability, learning disabilities, speech impairments, and other impairments have remained flat over this time. So those really kind of form the overall highlights that I'll mention here for students with disabilities, and I'll talk about some performance metrics when we get to that section.
Paul, are these numbers MECE, mutually exclusive, collectively exhaustive? Are there people that might have more than one of these?
Absolutely there are. Good question. The next metric finds its way into the profile and performance report in various areas. For whatever reason, I think as they moved from the strategic school profile to this new one, they'll eventually clean it up and make it a little bit more logical in terms of how they place it. But as you know, there are 2 metrics for college and career readiness. There's basically an access metric, which says how many students are accessing college and career coursework at our high schools, and then there's an achievement metric. How are they doing? Relative to access, as we've shared in the past, the way that that's measured by the state is the number of juniors or seniors who take 2 or more college and career ready courses, which they define as advanced placement, international baccalaureate, which we don't have at our high schools, career and technical education to include workplace experience, and early college experience or dual enrollment programs with our colleges. We have, in this last year, had 63% of students in grade 11 and 82% of students in grade 12 having that access, which again is slightly above the state average in grade 11 and well above the state average by about 10 points in grade 12. I'll call those baseline numbers. If you're looking at older PPRs, it looks like we had this huge jump. We didn't actually have a huge jump. They just decided for the 15-16 school year that they would include the early college experience dual enrollment courses, the UConn, ECE, and other similar courses in the metric for that first time. So it created a huge jump, not just for us, but for all schools. Kind of masks how well we were doing against everyone with AP at the end of the day. In terms of our achievement data, the state defines the achievement metric as the number of students in a graduating class who have passed at least one college and career ready exam. And they define college and career ready exams as, again, advanced placement, IB, the SAT, hitting the college and career ready benchmarks on the SAT and hitting both of them, and or the ACT. So we kind of lose out on our dual enrollment participation, but we, for this reported year, we were at 62%, which was well above the state average of 41%. So I think that's really evidence when we give our reports on both the SAT and the AP, we see that we're doing well. We're extremely competitive relative to the rest of the state. Moving on, we get to performance and accountability, and these are really the sort of the rest of all of those metrics. And it bears a little bit more description on my part. There are essentially 3 relatively new metrics for us to discuss. The first of these is called the District Performance Index, or DPI. There are corresponding school performance indices, and students, when they get their state testing results back, they get student performance indices. There is a thing called the average percentage of growth target achieved that's used to measure student growth. And then there's the achievement gap. The fact that these are new is aligned to how the state's trying to improve its reporting. So if you think back in the past, when we had a proficiency model or even a goal model, we would simply report percentages. Hey, here's the percentage of students that made goal. Here's the percentage of students that made proficiency. So you were either a yes or a no. You were either in the category on the good side or you weren't. These measures, aside from A, including growth target, which is a new piece, as we know, they're intended to be a little bit more descriptive because there are growth targets that are set, and I could simply, and by I mean the state, could simply say, well, did you meet goal yes or did you not meet goal no? That's kind of equivalent to saying, do you have a fever, yes or no? Versus, what's your temperature reading? How high is that fever? How close to target? How far above target are you? How close to grade level? How far above are you on those? And so that's the purpose behind the DPI measuring achievement, the average percentage of growth target measuring growth, and then our achievement gap. So let's dig a little bit into how they're calculated. And we'll start with that index score, that district index performance index. You start essentially by looking at state scores, what the scale scores are. And for this example, I'm going to use a subject-specific example. I think the numbers that you'll see on this are related probably to grade 3 English Language Arts, but it could be anything. In grade 3 English Arts, if you look at the graphic on the right, which shows level 1 through level 4, the bottom of that, the floor of that graph, the lowest possible score scaled is 2,114. Now, I understand that's completely ridiculous. That's what it is. In the same way that if you write your name on the SAT, you get something like 200 points or whatever. The highest score, the ceiling of that test, if you are at the top of the advanced range, is 2,623. So there's a range here represented by this arrow of 509 points. The level 3, which is described to be at grade level, is banded, represented by these blue dots, between 2432 and 2490. Okay? So that's how many points you'd need to earn up from the floor of 2,100. So if we look at this metric that says, okay, well, you essentially just take the score that you earned, you subtract the lowest possible score achievable, and you divide by that range of 509, and then you multiply it by 110%, because this is not based on reaching grade level. This is based on giving you sort of extra credit, up to 10% extra credit or more if you're above grade level. That's how the metric is made, and that is what the definition of the performance index is. This sandwiches on grade level performance between 68.7 and 81.3. And the state then sets a target of 75. They would like every child, ideally, to score a performance index of 75 points, whatever that translates back into as a scale score, which would place the average student well in the middle of the at grade level band. So that's a lot of complicated explanation. It's a more complicated metric than simply saying, yeah, I'm in that level 3 somewhere or I'm not. It's a measure of how far into it are you. You average that up for all students in a school, and you have a school performance index. You average that up for all students in a district, and you have a district performance index, and the goal is always 75 for all students, regardless of any category that they might be placed into. Tracking? All right. That's achievement. The next definition isn't as complicated, but it's complicated enough. It's growth. Now, growth is simply based on, as common sense would dictate, 2 consecutive years of test data. And they measure your scale score against your scale score. Now, first and foremost, you gotta, in order to stay at exactly the same level, you do have to have a certain amount of growth all by itself. But on top of that, there is a predetermined growth target that's been set. And we'll talk quickly about how that's set. But the growth targets, so that you know, they're not the same for every student. They vary based on what level you were in. So if you were in that lowest level of performance before grade level, below grade level, if you were in that level 3 where we want you to be, on target at grade level, if you were at that level 4 above target, you would have a different growth target, but everyone would have a growth target, even students that are above grade level. So the first thing that happens is this graphic is trying to depict is you measure, well, how well did you do, as evidenced by, say, 4 sample students in red, against the growth target, which would be blue. Obviously, in this example, the growth target's the same for everyone. That's just for simplicity. I can see from this graphic that some of the students made the growth target, students 2 and 3, and some of the students didn't. So I could say, hey, 50% of kids made the growth target. But a more defined measure would say, well, how close did kids come in general? And so what we do is we find the difference between the score to find the measure of growth, and then we compare that to the percentage of the growth target achieved. So student 2, they made exactly the growth that they needed to be on target. So they made 100% of their growth target. Student 3, they made 6 points above the target of 60. So they made 110%. Student 1 only made 42 points of growth. Their target was 60. Student 1 grew, but they didn't grow enough. They only made 70% of their growth target. So we calculate the average percent of growth target achieved across all students. The goal, as set by the state, is 100%. That's setting a high goal, saying we want every kid to not only grow, but to make the growth target that we're after. So you say, okay, great, that's a great goal. Where does the growth target itself come from? That's when we get into some really interesting stuff. In this graphic with the different colors, these are all just examples. They're not based on any real distributions. They're just examples. You take all the growth for all the kids that happened in the first year of the test, and you stack it up with the kids who made the most growth on top and the kids that made the least growth on bottom. And you draw a line at the 60th percentile. So you draw a line to say 60% of kids did above this line did the same or better than me, and everyone else did less. That became the growth target for all kids in that performance band. So even though we want 100% of kids to hit that number, we know by definition moving into the game that 40% of kids didn't make that number already. It's a rigorous bar. Okay, it's a high standard. So those are the somewhat complicated definitions. So we'll go back and see, okay, so how did we do? We start with achievement. In achievement, our target was a 75. We hit our goal in English language arts when we aggregate all students together, but you can see how we did high needs versus non-high needs. We fell short of our goal in math, the goal of 75, and we fell short of the goal in science. And this bears a little explanation because these numbers are somewhat deceiving. This actually represents a slight dip for us in English language arts, aggregating all grades 3 through 8 and 11 this year against the previous year. And some of that dip in English language arts can be explained by the fact that we changed tests. We moved from the Smarter Balanced Assessment in grade 11 in 2014-15 to the SAT in 2015-16. So in some ways, this English language arts and this math measure represent a new baseline. Math was actually up. I believe it was 2.5% or more. And our math performance of 68.3, even though we're not hitting the 75, we're doing better than 1/3 of the state in mathematics. We're doing better, relatively speaking, in math than we were in English language arts, even though our number's lower. And that's just based on a difference in the bar. Math on the SAT has a higher bar, and math performance, when you look at it across the state in grades 3 through 8, has those differences. Interestingly, science, I need to do a little more study on the science so that I can give more explanation, but last year, you'll recall when we reported our data for science, we had the highest year ever in grade 10, and we had a very positive year in grades 5 and 8, where very comparable to our previous years, where we've had some of our highest years ever in recent history. So again, I believe more than anything, it's simply reflecting the rigor of the measure. Relative to our growth, again, our target is 100%. We're at a 62.5 for all students and a 65.8, I clicked a little soon, 65.8 in math. So we actually had better growth in math than we had in ELA. We can see some of our gap data, but we have a separate metric where we'll look at gap. So thinking about that whole 60th percentile thing that I was explaining, this tells us that we're doing slightly above average in English language arts. Truthfully, I think we'd like to be doing better. I think we'd like more distance. And we're doing, I'd say, comfortably above average in our mathematics in terms of growth for our first year. But again, these are areas where when we've reported on these, we want even more. So lastly is the achievement gap. So as I look at these differences between our high needs group, and again, we now measure our achievement gap with high needs, and the populations of students in the high needs groups are our English language learners, our students with disabilities, and students that are identified as socioeconomically disadvantaged based on their eligibility for free and reduced lunch. We see how the non-high needs students did in comparison to the high needs, and we simply do a simple subtraction to find that difference. And then that difference is compared to a threshold that's set by the state. They say, okay, when is that difference statistically significant? That it means that you have a gap. So if our difference is bigger than this number, we have a gap. Any gap for us is significant, but this is when the state will say, okay, you want to be thinking seriously about that. We already think seriously, but it certainly bears noting that we do have a significant achievement gap in mathematics based on these metrics for this year, and we've just crested the significance level within science. Graduation is one more place where they measure achievement gap, and it's very pleased to report, when you look at these metrics, that our graduation rates for our non-high needs students versus high needs students is a gap of less than 4%. Dramatically less than what it appears to be in the state, which I think is a great reflection for the strength of our schools. So that's probably some of the most in-depth. There are a few other metrics that I'll talk about. There are graduation metrics that are covered. There are 4 of them. The On Track for Graduation, which looks at the number of students entering as freshmen that have not earned more than 1 F in any of the core academics. We've met the state-defined goal of 94% 2 years in a row. It does bear mentioning that we had a slight dip from 97.2 last year, a very high year, to only 94.2, so we just made that 94%, something we'll keep an eye on. We have our 4-year cohort graduation rate, the percentage of students who, when they enter school as 9th graders, graduate 4 years later. We're at 93.2, just missing the 94% target set by the state. That's just a very small dip from last year where we were at 94.1. We have our 6-year cohort graduation rate for high needs students, recognizing that under law, students that are English language learners or students with disabilities may qualify to be educated until age 21. We're at 90.2%, which is a stable figure. The state doesn't differentiate their goal. They still want that to be 94% as well. But we're 12 points higher than the state average on that, so I think we're doing great work. Always room for some improvement. And then there's a post-secondary entrance metric of 83.2, which has been a stable figure since it's been reported. And again, we're more than 10 points above the state average on that as well. Under our participation metrics, we heard about participation and why that's important relative to Conard High School's recognition. We are very strong. I think movement in grade 11 to the SAT is going to take care of any of our high school participation. We're at 99%. This year for the 2015-16 year overall, we were at 98% for our high needs group, so there's absolutely no difference there. In terms of PE has participation on the physical fitness tests that take place in grades 4, 6, 8, and 10, and we're at 94.2%, which is up slightly from last year. Our work there that we need to do is in getting kids to pass all 4 of those events. That's where we and many in the state struggle. And then our arts access, and I know we talked a lot about arts access. That's the number of students that take at least one course in the arts in a given year. We're at 47.7%, which is fairly close to the state average. It's a place where I almost would have expected that we would do better based on our the importance we place on the arts, but that's really a reflection of our 8-period school day and the number of opportunities kids have for electives, which is constrained versus other places, but we are not underperforming there. So that's really the end. I just kind of sum it up with a reminder on the purpose of these metrics and what the state has done. The state has really made efforts to move away from a proficiency-based model and what they called adequate yearly progress into a mastery model and what they now talk about with college and career readiness. Part of their rationale are based on these national statistics. These are not West Hartford. These are not Connecticut statistics. They're national statistics. They compare performance on the NAEP to the ACT and the SAT nationally and look at the percentage of kids. Now you see these figures themselves are somewhat dated, but in the PPR, they have the most recent NAEP data for the state of Connecticut and nationally. Nationally, we're not doing any better in reading. Most recently, we were at 35% here, and we dipped significantly in math, nationally down to 32%. Connecticut's doing better. We're at 45% and 37% respectively. We don't have West Hartford figures on the NAEP. NAEP is not reported out based on school. It's reported out based on state. But those are statistics that we use to gauge educational policy on a national level. And it just talks about we need to be more focused. These numbers aren't where anyone would want them to be. So we need to be more focused not on lower bars, but on higher bars. And so that's really what's happened both in the curriculum in terms of what we've done as a state and a nation, trying to get to fewer standards at greater depth, and also with our assessments, moving from minimum proficiency to mastery models. So I apologize if that was long, but somewhat dense in terms of this report, and I really only scratched the surface, so I leave it to any questions that you might have.
Thank you. There is a lot of depth here, so I'm sure there'll be questions. Anybody want to? I'm happy to start, but you know me, once I start, I just keep going, so. All right. Thank you. It took me several hours to go through this, so I really appreciate it. And those of you who following along at home, this report is available online. So, right?
Thank you. I neglected to mention in the board report that you can access online, it has a link to the website, or if you simply Google EdSite, EDSIGHT, you Google that, it'll come up. That is the Connecticut's public access. All of those reports are there. You can search by any district, town, and you can drill down into a school level.
Great. So I'm just going to refer to the page numbers. We all have them in front of us, but those of you playing at home can join us if you care to. So just starting with page 1, I'm going in order. The enrollment data, I was just surprised by this, but I just want to clarify that despite the high diversity that we are appropriately proud of, West Hartford is still whiter than the state and less diverse than the state average. Is it right? That's I'm reading that correctly? That
you are,
okay.
But when you compare us, say, to our DERG and those towns that we compete with, we're certainly much more dramatically diverse.
Mm-hmm.
So that's always one of those pieces that we talk about. If we're comparing ourselves to more of the cities like a Hartford, a Bridgeport, or even in areas close by such as New Britain, they're going to have much more diversity than we do.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure I was reading it correctly, because then moving down to some of the others. The second on that page, chronic absenteeism and suspension expulsion. I have a couple of what do you make of this kinds of questions. And the first is that I noticed that there is more chronic absenteeism among women, among girls, than among boys, which I just think is interesting. And yet, there is there's far higher expulsion and suspension rate among boys than among girls. I'm just going to leave that because that's opening a can of worms, but I do want to open a different can of worms on that, which is that if you look by any breakdown in the group. African American boys are suspended at, it looks to me like 5 times the rate of white boys. They are suspended more frequently than those getting free and reduced meals. Is there any reason to suspect racial bias here in decision-making about who gets suspended and who gets...
There is educational research is replete with references to exactly these kinds of trends. The suspension, expulsion, or the disciplinary rates for males always tend to far outweigh those of females. When you get into racial and ethnic categories, African American and Hispanic males are going to be the group that we see that in, and so it is sobering to recognize that we're not different in that regard from other districts, other states, and really just continues to emphasize the need for our continued work that we're doing. And I would be interested, to hopefully see us declining in these areas. I don't know I honestly don't know what that looks like for the current year, because for any of the metrics that we talk about tonight, I'll recognize that this is the 2015-16 report. We're always, based on the timing of these reports, reporting one year delayed. But those are very, valid observations.
Yeah, Andy will present on this in a couple weeks in our annual discipline report, so you can answer some of those questions more directly. One thing I will say, we definitely pay attention to it. We changed something a few years ago in that every disciplinary letter that goes out for a detention, that's school-based detention, one copy goes to the parent, one copy goes to the school, one copy goes directly to the superintendent's office, so that we can look at all the schools, make comparisons, look at the letters, look at what the decision is. And Andy also meets with the assistant principals to talk about, okay, what are our trends, what are we seeing, so that you can look, not that you're questioning every single decision, but so that you're aware of, okay, what's happening and does this speak to something larger, so whether we get the answer for it or not, are we asking the questions? And I think we are, and I think Rosina's work with cultural competency and how do we understand ourselves, how do we understand our kids, the purpose of it isn't because of discipline. That's not the purpose of what we're getting to, but it's something we need to talk about and that we are talking about in various subcommittees and overall with the steering committee about what does it mean, how are our experiences different, and how do we see each other and our kids.
Yeah, and again, I don't mean to be pointing fingers at anyone. I'm just, part of the reason that the numbers are higher nationally is because there is generally a bias in who gets suspended, who gets accused of things, who gets in trouble for certain kinds of behaviors. So I just want to make sure that we are asking that question.
And it's part of the reason that the state reports it is so that people pay attention to it and talk about it. So that's good.
Thank you. I was going to move on to page 3, but did you want to jump in, Carol, on that?
You sort of answered what I was going to ask, because I was going to ask if there were some common themes. And I know West Hartford is good about addressing certain things that come up time and time again. So you sort of answered that, both Tom and you. You're looking to ask the question and looking at some ways of resolving this down the road, especially since this is a 2015 report.
And I also think it's important that we don't, I never want to be the sunshine and roses superintendent that covers my ears and eyes and buries the head and says, things are fine, aren't we so great? Anytime these numbers come about, they become a major topic of conversation and I'd be completely lying if I said we're there yet and we have the solutions. We're working on it.
I just, I would hate to bring the element of race into this if people are getting in trouble. I mean, they should be punished accordingly. So, I mean, I can look at these numbers and I can certainly see as a percentage, one race group is higher than the other, but I still want to point out that, you have to do your job. You shouldn't feel constrained by, I guess, having to meet some I guess arbitrary percentage breakdown of punishments and suspensions handed down. I hope that's not the message we're sending here.
I think what might more be the point is that a lot of maybe people are talking about more the smaller offenses that might not be picked up as much if you're a white kid than as if you're a Black or Hispanic kid. So I think that, it's a question that we have to ask in the sense that, like, are school administrators looking at like a minor offense from a Black or Hispanic kid and saying, oh, we're definitely going to punish him, and then maybe looking at white kid and being like, we'll glaze over that fact, we'll see if, just
is there
on
evidence of that
probation type
happening?
thing.
No, but the question is
I'm just raising the question.
Exactly.
I'm not
Nobody's
saying that there's
saying it is
evidence. I'm
happening.
just raising the question. And I think that's what Dr. Graber was trying to do as well.
No, exactly. The point is not, is it happening? The point is, are we asking whether that's what's going on?
Because I would argue that even for minor offenses, if we're punishing one group but not the other, I think we should punish everybody.
Maybe the suspension rate for white kids should be higher, but
I think that's the
right.
I think that's the point.
That's fine by me.
And that's why we would be asking the question. I think that's the point, is that we're trying to make sure that everyone's punished equally.
Yeah, I think your point is well taken in that we don't want to celebrate when it's a white kid that does something bad. Oh, good, that elevates our numbers. I understand that thinking too. That's exactly why we try to look at everything. Andy gives it a lens. The principals try to give it a lens in terms of, do we know what's happening? Do we have the numbers, and are we having the conversation so that we know, yeah, for that was appropriate. One thing we'll never know, as we talk about, is we don't know the known unknown of people that didn't get suspended. So that's the difficulty in any of those metrics.
Right. No, when percentages get thrown around, I don't want to have the administration be guided by percentages of, well, we're too high in this group or too low in that group. We should have standards that apply to everybody and make sure that they're upheld across racial boundaries.
I agree. I'll add one piece to the puzzle, because really I want to react to, it's not all about punishment either. It's about if there's any student from any background who's tending to get in trouble, and sometimes these numbers maybe, I have to look at how they're calculated, if they're incident counts, if the same student is counted more than once, and so on and so forth. But what is it about the environment that we're providing where maybe any child isn't connecting and then acts out? What, because that acting out is based on some unmet need, some dissonance with what we're trying to provide. So noticing that there's a significant number of any students that are potentially falling prey to some infractions. If I don't assume that that kids are coming here to willfully do bad things, which we have those, and if that happens, those are dealt with pretty equitably, pretty fairly, and pretty rapidly. So it's what are those other pieces, and how do we need to just look at how we're communicating, how we're providing, so that more students are successful and we drop all the numbers.
I'm glad you brought that up, because sometimes with discipline, and anytime we talk about, we're talking immediately about high school in our own minds, and we're talking about suspensions and this, and really Paul shines a light on something that's really important, and that is that we have discipline in the elementary schools too, and we're not advocating for when a first grader pinches or slaps or hits another child that we arrest that child for assault. That's the true question here is, okay, what does that mean? What do we need? And that's the part of teaching that we don't. Discipline is a part of the curriculum, and discipline doesn't always mean punishment. That can be a component of it, but if we have 5, 6, 7, 8-year-olds that are struggling, as Paul said, to behave appropriately in school, we don't have much time to get them on track, because we know that if they don't get on track by middle school and high school, those are the ones that are most in danger of not graduating. And inevitably, those are the ones that are also in danger of not meeting success in society. And so I'm really glad you brought that up, because that is a key. I don't want to lose those young ones that frankly have become more of an issue over the past few years, that we have had more struggles in our elementary schools with some students having trouble adjusting to the school setting, adjusting to the schedule, adjusting to the demands that are on them. So,
Yeah, I just want to say that to me the statistics are there to raise questions. So, for example, the fact that boys get suspended more than girls might also be that the school system is designed for girls who are taught to sit quietly more than boys who tend to be more active. And so boys may be punished more often because they have more energy and are bouncing off the walls. So again, it's not to say it's good or bad, it's to say, what do we learn when we look at this number? Because I was thinking when you said about what kinds of needs, I could see a kid, I could see, for example, and I'm not saying this happens, but that the rate for African American kids being suspended, whatever, because of violence might be higher because they're being bullied, for example. Well, then we need to find out not just are we discriminating, are we blaming black kids more than white kids for hitting, but is there something that's going on that's impacting them? So I just want to say again that I just wanted to make sure that we were asking the questions of what does the statistic tell us? Okay, page 3. Students, on the top right-hand corner is students with disabilities placed outside the district. And again, this is just a factual question. We are higher than the state in our out-of-placement rate. We placed out 13.1 and the state average is 9.1. And I'm just curious because, in fact, we have unusual services in-house, everything from Strive to whatever. And so I just wonder, and we don't seem to have a higher proportion of special needs kids. And maybe I'm wrong. So I'm just curious about what that tells us.
So, good question. I took note of a difference in the 1 year blip on that, but I didn't prepare a lot of homework on the subject. So
I talked to, Gretchen and I actually discussed this when we first got the report, and we have seen an increase this year. And while you're correct, and I would like to point out, geez, without Strive, what would the numbers look like then also? And but when you go back to look at students living with autism, so it's not special education students as a general, but what students are likely to require outside services, we have more of those type of students. So that's the,
It was just a curiosity question, but thank you. And now to turn to Jay's favorite topic of budget. Right underneath on page 3 is overall expenditures. And I'm just curious, both administration and support services and plant operation and maintenance are both higher than, I'm sorry, not the plant operation. Administrative and support services are higher here than by state, and the state average. And I just wonder if there's an opportunity there for us to look for savings, because it is unusual for us to be spending more than the state, particularly on administrative and support services. Again, just a question.
certainly we can look into how that metric is defined to understand what better goes into that. But to be honest, I felt that we had such a comprehensive look, line item by line item, on the budget that the trimming and the identification of expenditures there. My assumption is that's coming out through that process. There may be something relative to how that metric is calculated, and it may be in part related to our model for supervision, which is significant and is one of the real gemstones of the district, that we have content area supervision for our secondary teachers, whereas in a lot of districts, you're really talking about building principles in whatever they were certified in, having to be the Jack or Jane of all trades to all teachers in the building. So,
Yeah, and again, I'm not pointing
No,
fingers.
that's exactly the biggest difference we have in administration is we have department supervisors. And a lot of other districts just say the principal oversees what's taught in history. The other codicil to this is it has raised questions, A, that we're looking at, but also of how support staff is defined in the schools versus in offices, because you're not the only one to raise that question. A lot of us as superintendents have looked at it because based on just pure numbers, some things seem a little quirky, so we're trying to get some more information on that.
And again, I'm not saying we're doing it wrong. I'm just the difficulty in the budget process was that we just had a bunch of numbers and said, well, can we bring this down? And you would say no, and we'd say okay. So I'm just looking at the difference between the claims, the things that we believed, and then what the actual figures are. So again, I'm not saying we should have it lower. I was just asking. And similarly, this is just not a helpful category to me, but right underneath that, special education expenditures, we spend 22.4% of our budget on other expenditures, well over the state average of 15%. So that's everything doesn't include certified personnel, non-certified personnel, purchase services, tuition to other schools, or transportation. So are there other expenditures that we have that are particularly out of bounds, or is that, again, something that we should be looking at?
We will look into that with what they categorized as. I don't know that off the top of our head, but we'll get that with
Again,
Gretchen.
it's just a...
Yeah.
Okay.
Can I just say, I just wanted to say one thing that's obvious, and I know we're working on and we're continuing to see improvements with the educators by race and ethnicity. But when talking about the students and looking at our population, it is something to continue to strive more and more for. When we have those teachers in the classroom, in the building, in the school, and the students are seeing themselves reflected, and there's more of the cultural competency and more, boots on the ground, really looking at all students, I think that will have an impact too. And I see the improvement, but we have still, in my opinion, a lot of work to do in that area.
And Tammy, I'm glad you say that, because I think something as simple as that will have impacts in other areas, will have impacts on behavior, will has impacts on, we always strive to hire the best people, but it's also about, do our students see themselves reflected in the curriculum, in the culture of the school, in the in the personnel of the school, and we do want to find the right blend. I know that that's a goal that you are sustaining as a board, and it's a goal that we'll continue to work toward.
Moving on to page 5, unless anyone's, I don't know why it's all the odd numbers, but there we go. I hope you don't mind. I spent so many hours going over the damn thing. I just soon ask my questions. Okay. The cohort graduation, 4-year. I understand that students with disabilities, this is sort of an unfair category anyway. But in each of the other categories, the target rate, we are close to, if not over, the target rate for all the other groups. But we are really below the target rate with students with disabilities. Do you have any sense of why that is? Is the goal unrealistically high, or do we have a particular kind of set of students, or what?
So it's an interesting notion, and I need to do a little homework on the target rate that's set here. These are kind of like 1-year target rates towards an aim line, I believe 94%, because the ultimate target for all categories is the same, across all categories. In terms of students with disabilities, and remembering that, that's a fairly broad category of students. And when you look, say, at the population of students with intellectual disabilities, those students that are significantly cognitively impaired, they're, by virtue of the challenges that they have, are extremely unlikely to be graduating with the grade level peers. They're typically the students that may be eligible for continued services in our post-secondary programs, previously referred to as WAVE and Achieve. And the design of their programs is while there are grade level targets for certain things, the design of their programs also targets life skills and, the ability to be independent, functional adults. So depending on looking at those different classifications and understanding that they're all lumped together into this one category here for graduation explains some of those differences. But within those, it appears that there are these intermediate targets that are being set 1 year to the next to see if you're making improvement in staying on an aim line. But our ultimate goal for all those students will remain 94%.
I think it's important to note here, we do have a Wave and Achieve program. And I don't want to cast aspersions on anyone else or another district, but if you don't have something, you may not see the need. Whereas, if you see a need in a child, we have a program here to help that child get to where they need to be.
Okay, and the next topic I want to raise is the achievement gaps in general. But sticking on page 5 for a moment, this isn't even a question exactly, but I just want to observe 11th and 12th graders meeting the benchmark on at least one college readiness exam. For white students, 73.8% met at least one, the benchmark on at least one exam. For African American students, that was 30.4%. For Hispanic and Latino, there were 33%. And for free and reduced lunch meals students, it's 32.7%. I just wrote "oi" next to it. It's not a question. This is really a huge gap, and I know we'll get into specifics on the next page, but I just wanted to observe that this is big.
For both principals, every year when they set goals at the beginning of the year, this is the topic of their goal-setting conferences at both high schools and at secondary schools. It has to feed in, but I wish I could say it's a new problem, and we haven't. It is vexing, and we're doing everything we can to make sure it's open, and we've got to make sure people are asking kids to take the course too.
Absolutely, which is something else we've been discussing, and that actually leads me into page 6, you'll be glad to know, which is the page where it talks about the performance indexes that you spoke of towards the end, both the performance index and the academic growth index. And once again, it identifies achievement gaps, and you've said we need to address them, but I have a slightly different question, which is, are these achievement gaps narrowing at all from previous years? What seems to be working? What seems to not be working? Are there questions we ought to be asking about what we are doing to do it, to say, oh, that's been really useful, this is not helping?
Absolutely. So I can recall the report that we did on the 2015-16 state assessment results, where I believe we demonstrated some specific areas where the gap had actually begun to narrow. I apologize that I don't have all of those metrics, but I know that I can certainly bring that back, and that's a component that we do. Like when you were talking about the college and career readiness, I know it wasn't a question, but I can recall from our AP exam presentation that we broke those demographics down at that time, and so that was the first opportunity that we had to look at that and go, and so now I'm excited to trudge that out again and say, remember how we didn't like this back then? Well, we don't like it any better today. It reaffirms our need to look at all the different reasons why that might be, right down to choosing to participate on the test, because you can't hit the college and career readiness benchmark if you don't participate in the test. So what might be obstacles for that? Is it enrollment in the course? Is it cost of the exam? Is it interest? Is it lack of a peer group in the class? There are so many different facets. Is it that no one has tapped you individually on the shoulder and said, hey, why don't you give that a try? And we're looking at all angles of that problem. We're looking at it here as well. But I do recall some specifics of how that gap had decreased on some of our metrics. And when we get our state testing results back again this year, it'll obviously continue to be an area where we want to report, we want to provide transparency, we want to celebrate victories that we have, and when we don't have them, we want to try to understand why and redouble our efforts and find new ways to attack the problem.
Actually, you remind me of something you brought it up. About 3 months ago, I sent out the report from the College Board by town of AP test participation. That 30% is, that you mentioned for 70% makes me say, oi, too. If we looked at it by town, that 30% of African American students participating is higher than a significant number of towns have overall, which I'm not saying is
Great.
okay. No, but it is, but I'm not talking about the Hartfords. I'm talking about suburban, rural communities that limit. So believe me, I agree too, but I did want to point that out, that this is, listen, we need all of our students performing like all of our students do. But I don't want it to be thought of in terms of we're providing less opportunities than another community would, because as painful as this is to say based on those numbers, we're still the model that other communities are coming to us asking us, how are you opening up? How are you getting these numbers so high? Which is, I understand, but I didn't want.
I just would like to say one thing I think of is maybe it's happening too late. And what I mean by that is seeing yourself as a talented, capable, younger child that teachers and people in the school community recognize and encourage, and that you're tapped for, if you're not in the Quest program, still some way of feeling good about your ability to learn and to participate, and so that it travels up over time, so that by 11th grade you're not thinking, maybe I can't do this, or I'll try this is the first time and I'm not performing well. It's something that should start much earlier, and I'm afraid that oftentimes these students are overlooked. They're capable and talented, have not had that opportunity and exposure early enough, and it reflects later. They may be getting suspended, I have no idea. But I'm just saying it's something that I think is really important to look at, a younger model, really pushing down and seeing that opportunities to start early so that you're comfortable and capable and ready by the time you're in high school.
So I just want to respond and agree with the sentiment that early recognition, encouragement is dramatically important. I also want to give kudos to some of our elementary staff, only because by recent experience today, I spent 6 hours with 45 teachers, many of them from our elementary schools, and we were working on our professional learning and evaluation committee, and we were talking specifically about what we are doing along those lines of effort. Along with cultural competence. Rosina was presenting, Carrie was presenting, and we were in the room. And the ideas and the dedication of all of our staff, but definitely our elementary staff, was just over the top, outstanding. And so I think, to Tom's point, change is incremental. We do. When we've compared, the dramatic sizes of our gaps, and when we look at our gaps compared to other gaps, we don't want to sit up here and say, hey, look, we're doing better than everyone else when the gap is so large. And at the same time, we don't want to say, hey, look, we're not doing anything. So it's finding the right way, but we recognize, and I think when I say we, it's the comprehensive, it's K through 12, it's everyone in all roles. Recognize and believe in. I really want to say that the work that Rosina has done has taken a strong hold into the culture, into the fabric of schools. And I was so impressed with the teachers that I was working with today in terms of their ideas that we're going to try to implement next year, that's going to just continue to push us along this continuum.
I would add, in terms of those AP courses, and when students are introduced to them, a lot of time it's the first time, and the study technique is very difficult because they have to balance the other courses that they have. And the AP courses are on a such higher level because it's a college course. And so that in and of itself is going to require much more time that you have to spend with that course. And I know a number of students not only struggle with that, but then struggle, how do they ask for assistance from the teacher without feeling like, oh, they should know this, or they're not as smart as they should be in taking this course. So sometimes that also serves as a barrier. But I'm happy to hear that you all are looking at all these different things and are asking the questions in terms of how to address that, because that can be significant. And just one more thing I'm just going to add, as we were doing our college tours, and I know I have to tell our doctors around the table that a number of professors have said that's one of the biggest struggles with freshmen is that they don't ask for help and they wait too late. By that time, they're receiving a failing grade and they don't understand how it's very easy. That's why the professors are there. Just come and we'll help you and direct you to where you need to go.
It's so important you say this, and this is just for any parents that are watching. That's why I love struggle. Because what a child has to do at some point in their life is go to the teacher themselves. Because once they do it, they'll do it again. You just got to get them to do it the first time. So parents can't solve the problem for the child every single time, because at some point, that struggle has to result in the child having enough courage, supporting them, but them going to the teacher and saying, I need help. And if you can get a child to do that one time with any teacher, then they'll start going all the time, because they're like, oh, this is no big deal. This is just what you do. And it's an important skill to get across. So I agree completely.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I mean, we, at our house, we are very clear with our son. If you have trouble, ask for help. Now, if there are home issues, I mean, that's, I don't know how you come around all of those. But I will ask that I think we've sort of addressed this at some point, either earlier this year or the previous year, where we're trying to figure out how folks get kids to take their AP courses. It was either under Bruce. I think maybe Bruce might have asked it, or maybe it was even this year. But what really are the criteria for teachers to go out and recommend kids to take AP courses? And I don't know if we've ever really heard it, but it would be instructive, I think, for this board to understand it. And that way, we're working with a little bit of a better base of knowledge. And that way, we can say, yeah, maybe we can improve. Maybe we can do something different.
Well, I know you want to
go ahead.
I want to give you kudos and warm you up. And I'm glad you brought that back, Jay, because I was going to say to Carol, that whole balance of engaging in the struggle and saying, I'm going to try this AP course, or I'm going to try this honors, or I'm going to try, heck, I'm fifth grade moving up to sixth grade, and I'm going to try Chinese as my world language. Something which I think you recognize as outside of your everyday experience. Tom did an outstanding job as principal, and I know our two principals tried to emulate this and carry this tradition of identifying a culture where you as the student find that interest area and you say, I have a goal for every student to try to take one AP, try to take one stretch experience. And as we build that into a culture, the recommendation becomes individualized, more so based on your interest and motivation. I hear a lot, well, that AP course, that's a college course. And I sometimes even hear teachers say, well, I got to get these kids ready for college, so I got to make it harder than it needs to be. My son's a freshman in college, and I'll ask him about some of his courses, not all. And I ask him to compare. How is it relative to the workload or this or that? And there are those courses that are more challenging, and there are those courses that are about at an equal level of challenge. I think we do a great job with all of our curriculum trying to get kids to be critical thinkers, trying to get them to, I go through all the stuff, make claims, support evidence, but it's that doesn't necessarily, what's separated in college more so than anything else is that every single day experience, the ease of contact probably, that the coursework all by itself doesn't have to be harder, and where kids will generally flourish in college is because eventually they get targeted into their critical areas of interest. If we can identify those at school and we have an AP course or some other kind of course, criteria is I'm a hard worker, I have interest and passion, I think I can do it.
You really said it all. We don't want there to be roadblocks and barriers to recommendations. That being said, what can happen is all 6 teachers think, yeah, you can do that work. You should take the AP course in this subject area. That's where parents and school counselors have to be aware and say, that's too much for you. I mean, I'm not saying for I'm saying for the generic child. But we've done a lot of work in trying to identify those that are under recommended from middle school to high school, because sometimes things shift from 9th grade to 10th grade. And I think that, that culture is beginning to take hold more and more, where you're not fighting against a kid getting into an honors class. The kid says they want to be in it, the parent says they want to be in it, which is different than just the parent saying it. I mean, there has to be a child buy into it too. And, our numbers of exams taken, our number of courses taken will say that it is taking hold, that we are recommending kids more appropriately. With the codicil, we don't want somebody who's getting a C in Algebra 2 to be recommended for Calc BC. However, what if they're getting a C because they just never get through their homework, but they get hundreds on everything? Then maybe that kid should be, and that's why we don't want those bars of, you need this grade to move forward.
Yeah, I also don't want to lose sight of Tammy's point that we have to do this in terms of inviting people in, but the earlier we start, the better. And that actually reminds me of a conversation we had very early this year when we had the Quest program presentation. Maybe it was the end of last year, I can't remember. And some of us asked if these approaches are just open up possibilities so much, why can't we start incorporating more of them into the regular classroom as well? So I just want to say that part of my question wasn't, are we addressing this, but are we looking at what we are doing to say, oh, that is working, but that isn't working, and let's think about restructuring things.
Yeah, I agree, and I brought that point up. I mean, Quest is, we've all had our discussion about Quest. Is what it is. But I still think that there's a lot of value there, and I don't think that value should necessarily be limited to a number of people. I mean, especially if there are kids that demonstrate some academic or intellectual capacity, that have the desire to do so, and have expressed, and the parents are on the same page. I mean, there's no reason why we shouldn't be able to deliver a Quest-like experience to the masses, as it were, because we're not trying to have an even distribution bell curve. All right, it would be really great if we could get a complete right skewing curve where everyone is doing well, everyone is proficient at above grade level,
like Wobegon.
Right. Yep. And that's, I think, obviously, I think that's probably the goal of the district. Easier said than done, of course, but to the extent that we can do that, I think that would be very good. Yeah. And
I just want to say, as a little bit of an aside, but since it came up about college preparation, I think the single greatest difficulty that high school students have moving to college is that they came from an 8-period-a-day, 5-day-a-week school, so that their idea of assignments is, here's what you do tonight, and here's what you do tomorrow night. And what they don't understand when they get to college is, you have to read a book. You have a week to do it, but you have to read the whole book. And and I see this all the time. Oh, look, I have to read this book for tomorrow. Well, yeah, you knew that last week. Right? So I will just say that as we look at curricular shifts and things like that, it would be really nice to think about ways that we can encourage students to start working on their own a little bit more, because otherwise, boy, is it a shock.
Better time management.
Well,
That's critical.
I think if you look at the syllabi from high school, which we do collect, you'll see more courses that are organized that way, where it is kind of more project-based, and you're kind of on your own, with the remembrance that though it may be a college course, it's not a college child, still a child. We need contact with parents, we need partnerships, we need to remind kids when they're not on track. But your point is very well taken, complete agreement, yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, just to finish my sort of set of questions about these gaps, because this has really been incredibly helpful. But as you noted, I mean, we have not only gaps in English language, math, and science, we have gaps in math and science that are higher than the state gap mean plus 1 standard deviation, right? That's a bigger gap than one would like to have, than our cohort in that sense. So my question is, do you have any idea why that's happened? I know in general it's harder for us to meet benchmarks in math performance and science. I get that, but do you have any sense of why we have a greater gap than others
I'll
seem
let
to
you
have?
take the big part of it because you do the individual. On a macro level in the state, the most disappointing part of this, because I thought, oh, growth is going to eliminate this, and Chip and I have had a lot of discussions about this. The wealthiest districts have the greatest growth. It's completely matched. I was hoping it would be different, and it's not. And as a matter of fact, it's more stark than other metrics we've used.
And that I actually have to wonder, is it because because these are wealthier families, et cetera, or is it because some of these less wealthy towns have less good schools? Again, that's not about West Hartford, and it's irrelevant. But I'm just saying that everything is complicated, as I keep reminding my students.
So I think this is the best I can share to answer your question, which aside from affirming the concern, I can remember doing a report at the table where we were looking and trying to give some new insights to our achievement gap stuff. I don't remember what year, if it was this year or 2 years ago or what it was, but we looked at the performance of any subgroup. You pick the subgroup you'd like, students with disabilities, African American, Hispanic, and compared our subgroup to the state total for that subgroup. Our subgroup outperformed. Then when you looked at, the majority group, white students for West Hartford in comparison to the state corresponding, our group outperformed. The difference is that our twofold. I think we're not getting the same value of the outperformance, so we're outperforming, but maybe not as much. And then with our white students, we were outperforming more. But also during that time, during that particular presentation, and even still, we have we're very diverse, but we have a majority of students in that one category. That then adds weight overall as you look at the gaps in total. I'd be curious to continue to look at that and see if multiple year trends support that. But I do remember looking at that once and sort of making that point at a presentation here at this table a couple of years back.
I think I've run out my time of questions. Anybody else have questions or observations, or we pretty much covered every nook and cranny? Thank you so much, and thank you for putting up with all of this grilling. We appreciate it. Okay, moving on to what are trivially noted as routine matters, but are hardly routine to us. Exactly. Are you up for the financial report today? Okay, so can we hear from Jay, ably aided by Chip, I believe, the financial report?
We have to make a motion to hear it first.
Oh, excuse me.
Let's
You're
follow
absolutely
protocol.
right. I forgot we needed a motion for this. May I have a motion to approve the financial report for the period ending March 31st, 2017?
So moved.
The review want to second it?
Dave's got a second.
There you go. Okay, take it away.
Clearly, we are out of practice, Dave, because we've not done this in a while. Well,
I'm just trying not to cough the whole night here, okay?
I understand that we've had a lot of exciting discussion tonight, but I like to think that this is the high point of any board meeting, the financial report for the period ending March 31st, 2017. So I'll direct you to turn to page 18 in your packets. and you will see that we are looking okay. We have a fund balance now to be projected at $53,000. This is an improvement over the previous month where we were looking at a $19,000 deficit. Some of the major drivers of that were as follows. We had some positive variances for salaries, a lot of little things here and there, and you know we're not. I don't need to go into every last detail, but I think that Chip and his squad have updated some of the estimates as far as staffing. Some leaves and there have been some leaves and absences where we're seeing some negative variances, and those replacements might have been more expensive at $30,000 over on 5112, for example. But by and by, in a $150 some odd million budget, this is pocket change, so there's not a whole lot to discuss there. Moving on to our state and federal grants, there are minor changes to that. We don't have a whole lot to really go with other than as per their custom, the parochial schools in West Hartford still really have not spent all their money. It's not up to us to go shepherd them around. They're free to not spend it. Rest assured, however, the district will not be leaving cash on the table. So nothing of material to report there. Yes. Moving on to special funds. We see a change from the prior month of $54,000. And that's largely been driven by preschool account with the tuition. There's been a restatement of expenditures, and I think that it's just one of those things where you can do all of the best estimating you can, and we're just a shade off. But again, in as large of a budget as we have, $29,000 isn't that much to get concerned about. Continuing education, we see a $30,000 loss. We're updated. We're expected to lose about $30,000 this year. This is not a surprise. The program's lost anywhere from $20,000 to $30,000 per year for the last 7 years. So, again, it's nothing to be overly concerned about. So we're showing a deficit of $54,000 in special funds.
May I just ask a question before you move on,
Yep.
just so that I understand?
Sure.
If you expect a deficit and we get a deficit
Yep.
routinely, does that mean that we're not budgeting enough to begin with, or what does it mean?
Well, it means that things are coming in a little bit higher than expected. So I don't want to say that Chip and his folks haven't budgeted. They've budgeted plenty. It's just that these are very fluid accounts, and sometimes you just can't forecast with that much precision, unfortunately. I do think, however, that as we continue to accrue losses, we may have to consider moving this line item over to the general fund. And that will be something a little bit down the road, right? Chip, sanity check me on that?
Oh, yeah. I mean, we budget this to basically break even. I mean, this is the Life Learn program, the adult education, not the mandated adult education, the enrichment adult education. We budget it to be zero, and then there's revenues and expenditures, and there's been a short negative balance for several years now.
Yep. Okay. The last and probably the most exciting part of the financial report is our nutrition services report. And it really heartens me because, as we know, we've been talking about this for many, many years and the problems contained within. I think just this past week, the new agriculture secretary, former governor of Georgia, Sonny Perdue, is going to relax some of the standards. Whether or not that happens in enough time to save this, I don't know. But it appears that more sodium can be introduced into our kids. Yes, I know. Well, as long as we remain solvent, I suppose that's all that matters. Well, look, hypertension can be controlled by medication at some point. Come on, details. Okay. The good news with this nutrition services report is that March actually we're showing a positive, which is nice. We're looking at right now $26,000 positive swing. Year to date, we're positive around $15,000. Now, I don't want you to get truly excited about this. We're still probably going to wind up with a small deficit, but as Dave and I have been ably reporting for the past couple of months, probably will be a lot lower than we initially projected at the beginning of the year. So that's good. But, the underlying current, you can see this in the board packet on page 22. We're with fewer days of operation. We're still seeing a pretty healthy decrease in the total number of school lunches purchased. Again, the thing that's really keeping us afloat, of course, are the federal grants. So the news is not nearly as dire as it had been or was thought to have been. So we will we'll press on, and Dave will tell us how we did next month. I know he's excited. He's already counting the days.
Thank you. Stay tuned.
You're welcome.
I just want to say before we vote that now that we've been through what I think is not only a really grueling budget season, but an incredibly thorough budget season, I just want to commend both of you. I feel like we knew a lot more than I might have expected to know, because you do this every month. I mean, I think it's been incredibly helpful to know where our expenditures have been coming in appropriately, inappropriately, had to judge. I just want to say that I never realized before really how important this is to our knowledge base, so thank you.
Maybe after the election, depending on what your position is, maybe you can become the financial examiner and meet with me and Chip and Andy at 7:30 or 7:45.
I am the only historian I know at Trinity who's willing to deal with numbers, so we can make that a conversation. Thank you. So, any questions? Okay. All in favor of approving the financial report for the period ending March 31st, 2017, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you. Once again, the ayes have it. Okay. Looking for a full sweep of unanimity here. Can I have a motion to approve the minutes of the regular Board of Education meeting of April 18th, 2017? Second?
Second.
Discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Oh my gosh.
When you have these simple questions, they're easy to gain unanimity.
Absolutely. That's exactly
Keep
right.
asking the simple ones.
Information and reports. Any communications or reports from board members? I sent you the correct ones over email, but anything else? Okay. Any other information or discussions? Okay. Non-staff communications and reports. That is reports from our student board representatives. I've lost count of who gets to go first. Hugo.
Well, hello. Here's the Conard update. So yesterday, Conard's coaches, well, it was actually an across-town coaches versus cancer game. It was a baseball game with Conard boys baseball winning 8-4. But it was all for a good cause. It was for breast cancer awareness, and everyone wore pink. It was really great. And AP exams are underway as of yesterday, and so far everything's going smoothly. We're only second day, but I'm confident that it'll continue that way. Last week, our student Grace Andrews received the Karen L. List Global Ambassador Award. Also, Conard SafeGrad is going to have a fundraiser at the new Moe's that will be opening in Bishop's Corner. And what's special about it is that Moe's is opening on a Friday, but we have VIP access on Thursday. So, yeah. And then Unified Theater is having their annual ice cream social as a fundraiser this Thursday, May 4th, from 5 to 8 in the Conard cafeteria. That's it.
Thank you. Sarah?
So on April 30th at the Connecticut State Latin Day, Hall took first place in the academic Sertiman competition. And then last Wednesday on April 26th, 500 sandwiches were made for local food banks during Do Something Day, which was during advisory periods. And that particular activity was sponsored by the Empty Bowls Club. And Colin Fitzsimons, who's a senior, was named to the National Football Foundation and College Hall of Fame Scholar Athlete. And then this Sunday, Cammie Cho and Patrick Cassie will be honored at the CIAC Scholar Athlete Banquet. And then last Friday, so also April 30th, girls lacrosse raised $914 in their Play for a Cure game for cancer research. And yesterday with Conard Baseball was the Strikeout Cancer game.
Thank you. So did the coaches win against cancer, and did we strike out cancer? Just, okay. West Hartford leads the pack again. Thank you both. Do you want to add something? No. Thank you. That was great. Future business. Future meeting dates include, put this on your calendars, Tuesday, May 16th, which is a regular Board of Education meeting at 7 right here. And then Tuesday, June 6th, another regular Board of Education meeting at 7 right here. Do I have a request for future agenda items? Do we have any comments from the hordes of visitors still clinging to life in the... We're all good. Okay. We have no executive session. Do I have a move to adjourn? Second. Okay. All in favor, stand up.